4:37 a.m. Eastern Pacific Ocean, 200 kilometers southwest of the Galápagos Islands. A semi-submersible cuts through the water like a ghost, hull painted black, designed to disappear from radar. The pilot pushes the throttle forward. He is 120 kilometers away from the nearest Coast Guard station. He believes he is undetected. He is wrong. The U.S. Coast Guard has been tracking this vessel since yesterday morning. Satellites detected it during construction. Thermal sensors locked onto its signature the moment the engines fired. In 90 seconds, his operation will end. $300 million in cocaine, 3 smugglers, 1 semi-submersible, and a Coast Guard response that has already been set in motion. Here's what happened. The morning started like any other for the Pacific Fleet's Surveillance Division. Operators sat at their stations, staring at screens filled with shipping routes, weather patterns, and radar signatures. The Galápagos region isn't known for cartel activity. It's mostly fishing vessels, research boats, and the occasional cruise ship. But on this particular day, something showed up that shouldn't have been there. A contact at sea level, no transponder signal, no identification code, no radio response. Just a blip on the radar that appeared and disappeared, appeared and disappeared. The pattern was deliberate, almost mechanical, like something was trying to stay beneath the radar coverage, literally moving up and down in the water column to avoid detection. Only one type of vessel does that, a semi-submersible. The operators flagged it immediately. Within minutes, the information reached the command center. Within 5 minutes, a Coast Guard commander was looking at satellite imagery of a vessel that had no business being where it was. The craft was roughly 40 feet long, narrow, with just a small cabin visible above the waterline. The rest of it sat submerged, kept afloat by the buoyancy of the submerged hull packed with cargo. Cocaine! Had to be. Nothing else travels like this. Nothing else requires this level of secrecy. The commander made a call. Interceptors were deployed. Meanwhile, 120 kilometers away, the pilot of that submarine still believed he was alone. His radio was off. His navigation lights were dark. His speed was constant at 8 knots, slow enough to avoid creating a large wake, fast enough to cover distance before sunrise. He had done this route 7 times before, 7 successful runs. 7 times the drugs made it to the Pacific coast of Colombia, where distributors picked them up and moved them north. This time would be the 8th. This time would be different. 2 RHIBs launched from the patrol vessel at 4:41 a.m. RHIBs are rigid-hulled inflatable boats, fast and maneuverable, driven by operators who have spent thousands of hours learning how to move through rough water at speeds that would terrify most people. These boats can do 50 knots in open ocean. They accelerated quickly, their engines roaring to life, the hulls slapping against the water with each wave. They were racing toward an intercept point, a location calculated by the command center based on the submarine's speed and trajectory. The pilots knew exactly where to be and exactly when to be there. The submarine pilot still had no idea they were coming. At 4:47 a.m., the first RHIB came into visual range. The pilot of the submarine saw the lights first, red and blue strobes cutting through the darkness. His heart dropped. He knew immediately what was happening. He pressed the throttle forward, a desperate move that accomplished nothing. A semi-submersible can't outrun a RHIB. The engines are designed for stealth, not speed. The pilot was trapped, and he knew it. The second RHIB pulled up on his port side, cutting off any escape route. Armed officers stood in the bow, their weapons visible but not aimed. Not yet. The message was clear. Stop, or things get worse. The submarine pilot killed the engines. There was no point in running anymore. But stopping wasn't surrender, not for the cartel. The men inside that submarine had been trained for exactly this moment. They knew what happened when they were captured. Prison. Long prison sentences in U.S. federal facilities, years of their lives gone. Some of them started destroying evidence, throwing sealed packages overboard into the darkness, hoping the ocean would swallow the cocaine before the Coast Guard could recover it. But the ocean doesn't work that way. The packets had been treated to float. They bobbed in the water like buoys, making them even easier to find and collect. The first officer boarded at 4:51 a.m. He was carrying zip ties and handcuffs and a focused expression that comes from years of training and dozens of operations just like this one. 3 men emerged from the cabin. They were soaking wet, not from the ocean, but from sweat. They knew what was happening. They knew how this ended. They came out with their hands raised, but not in surrender. They came out with resistance in their eyes, with defiance that said they weren't going down without making it difficult. The officers moved quickly, trained movements, practiced responses. One smuggler tried to resist, pulling his arm away as an officer tried to secure his wrists. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. 4 officers moved in at once, and the resistance ended. The man's arms were pinned behind his back. Zip ties secured his wrists. He was placed on the deck of the RHIB, face down, breathing hard through his nose. The other 2 followed without the same struggle, though neither of them looked at the officers. They stared at the ocean, at the darkness, at the Coast Guard vessel that was now moving closer to secure the scene. The submarine was cordoned off at 4:58 a.m. A larger Coast Guard cutter arrived and took control of the operation. Now the real work began. The officers had to catalog everything inside that submarine. Weapons, cash, communication devices, GPS coordinates that might lead to other operations, other laboratories, other distribution networks. The submarine itself was a piece of evidence, a technological achievement in criminal innovation that would be studied and documented and added to the growing file of cartel technology that the Coast Guard maintains. But the most important discovery was the cargo. The men started pulling the sealed packages from the submerged compartments. Each one was a brick of cocaine, roughly a kilogram, wrapped in plastic and sealed. They counted as they worked. 10 packages, 20 packages, 50 packages, 100 packages. The number kept climbing. By the time they finished, they had recovered 780 kilograms of cocaine, nearly $2 million worth at street level. $300 million worth on the international cartel market, where the profit margins are measured in multiples and distribution networks spread across continents. The 3 smugglers were transported back to the cutter at 5:17 a.m. They were placed in a secure holding area, their hands still secured, their eyes now focused on the reality of their situation. They would be taken to Ecuador first, then likely extradited to the United States. Federal charges would follow: conspiracy to distribute cocaine, operating a drug trafficking operation on the high seas, weapons charges if they were carrying firearms, which they were. One of them had a pistol in the cabin, the other had a machete. Neither of them had a chance against trained officers, but they were carrying them anyway, just in case. Just in case what happened, nobody was entirely sure. Desperation makes people do things that don't make practical sense. The operation was concluded at 5:43 a.m. The entire interception lasted just over an hour from the moment the RHIBs deployed to the moment the final package was counted and logged. 1 hour to stop a $300 million operation. 1 hour to change the trajectory of that cocaine shipment from the streets of Los Angeles or Miami or New York to an evidence locker in a federal building in California. What made this operation possible was something the smugglers didn't account for. They knew the Coast Guard had radar, they knew the Coast Guard had boats, but they didn't know that the satellites had improved. They didn't know that the thermal imaging technology had gotten better. They didn't know that the Coast Guard had learned over decades of operations exactly how to spot semi-submersibles and exactly how to intercept them. The smugglers were using tactics that worked 5 years ago. The Coast Guard was using tactics that work today. That's the difference between innovation and adaptation. The cartel invents a new way to move product, the Coast Guard adapts to stop it. The cartel adapts to the Coast Guard's response. The Coast Guard develops new technology. It's a cycle that's been running for decades, and the Coast Guard has gotten very good at it. The 3 smugglers are now in federal custody. They're facing sentences that will likely keep them in prison for a significant portion of their lives. They made a calculation that didn't work out. They believed the risk was worth the reward. They were wrong. The reward is now seized, and the risk has become their reality. The semi-submersible is being studied by Coast Guard engineers. It will teach them something about how the cartels are evolving their technology. The patterns of construction, the materials used, the design choices, all of it will be analyzed and added to the database of cartel innovation. Somewhere else, in a different laboratory, cartel engineers are working on the next version of the semi-submersible. It will be faster. It will be stealthier. It will be designed specifically to avoid the tactics that the Coast Guard used this morning. And when that version hits the water, the Coast Guard will have a year to figure out how to stop it. Then the cartel will innovate again. Then the Coast Guard will adapt again. This is how the war on drugs actually works. It's not a clean victory or a crushing defeat. It's incremental progress made one interception at a time. $300 million sounds like a lot, and it is. But it's a single shipment. There are dozens more moving through the Pacific right now. There are submarine programs in Colombia and Venezuela and Mexico that are launching new vessels every month. The fight is endless. The resources required are vast. The personal cost to the men and women who do this work is significant. But on this particular morning, the Coast Guard won. On this particular morning, 3 smugglers learned that the ocean is a lot smaller than they thought. That technology is only effective until someone figures out how to counter it. That the assumption of safety on the open water is an assumption that will eventually be proven wrong. Subscribe to see what the Coast Guard intercepts next.